Hello, folks, and welcome to this session on designing human AI interactions, guidelines or best practices to that. So, a little introduction about myself. My name is Liji Thomas. I'm a technical manager with Velorum Reply. We're based out of Kansas City in the US, but I work for their India office in Kochi, and that's the beautiful hometown of mine that you can see in the backdrop. You can find me in the following places online: LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm a little lazy on Twitter, but I do occasional blog posts as well. One of the things I'm attempting to do as a speaker is also trying to keep and kind of make my content, my presentations more accessible and more inclusive. So I like to take this as the best opportunity for that. I'm going to have an introduction of myself in that way as well. So I've introduced myself. So I am an Indian woman. I have a dusky skin color. I have long black hair, and I'm wearing a crimson red top. And I'm in a room that is got a white paint behind and got two paintings right behind me. So I hope that helps. And let's get started. So here's the agenda for the day. As we said, we're going to be talking about best practices in designing human AI interactions. We're going to be talking about the why. Why do we need these best practices? What these best practices are? When can we use that? Where do we exactly use these? Who are these meant to be? And how do we exactly use this in which specific situation? So let's dive in. So before we get started, perhaps one key takeaway that I'd love for you to have away from this session is, we're talking about best practices, we're talking about guidelines. These are, at the end of the day, I realize, only recommendations. So I would love for you to be inspired by the talk and consider using some of these recommendations as AI practitioners in the systems that you have built or you plan to build in the future. All right, so let's start with some questions. The entire session has been designed, it's been formatted in a particular way. I'm a mother of two kids, and my younger one is like 6 years, and I'm used to just getting questions all around. And I'm not very surprised because I ask a lot of questions myself. And so especially around this area, we hear a lot about responsible AI, ethical AI. There are more questions than answers, isn't it? So I thought, let's format this around some of the questions I myself asked when we started along the space. I've heard these questions in my circles, my friends, my peers, my teams asking these questions. So I thought asking questions is a great way to learn. So let's start with the first one. Why do we need guidelines? So the reason we need guidelines, I would say, is because of the proliferation of AI. AI is improving, it's just accessible and available, and the accuracy is just so increasing now. You could ask me, so still why, Liji? Why do we need guidelines? Because of the proliferation of AI, UI UX designers and AI practitioners in general are facing a lot of challenges. Again, why exactly? So the reason that they're really struggling with making designs for AI. Why are they struggling with making design for AI? Is because AI systems are unlike traditional systems, traditional computing systems. They're fundamentally different. Why are they fundamentally different from traditional systems? AI systems have an inconsistent behavior about them. And before you ask me the why of that, let me say, why are AI systems inconsistent? A couple of reasons. We have been used to the structured traditional programming paradigm, which says that everything needs to be predictable, everything needs to be very structured, very consistent. I need to know what's next and how it's going to be. Though we do attempt that in the AI systems that we try to create, it is extremely hard to mimic these AI systems. They tend to learn and adapt over time, to the point that sometimes it's so difficult to understand certain outcomes, and people go on to ask about explainable AI and interpretable AI and why the systems are so inconsistent. And because these systems are inconsistent, the need for having guidelines and best practices to build such systems that are still as powerful as they are is very, very important. Now, don't we have guidelines? Of course we do. A lot of these guidelines today actually exist in the academia. They exist in the research centers across the globe. Some major ecosystems in the industry as well. But most of these existing design principles, they don't really cater to AI systems. And even if they do, they're at very high level. They're not at a level where AI practitioners or programmers or developers can make use of it, can really make sense of it. And these guidelines are scattered as we speak. If they are available, if they are making sense, they're just too specific. They're just too specific to one kind of application and perhaps not applicable to others as well. So the guidelines that we are talking about today, where do these guidelines? This is a result of years of research from the industry, from the community, but Microsoft research team has sort of synthesized and curated 20 years of this research work. So they took literally 2 decades of this research work and brought them together. And they ran this through HCI practitioners, AI practitioners, researchers at Microsoft, all of these people, and they validated these guidelines. And this is how we have the guidelines that we have today, we're going to talk about today. So who is this for? These guidelines can be used by any AI practitioner. So you can be a designer, you can be a developer, you can be a product owner, you can be even someone who's just using an AI system, which I think 100% of our people are today. You'd find this very interesting to note. Going back from this, even if you are not building AI systems today, it'd be very interesting. Starting today, after this talk, you'd start thinking about every other AI system that you're using, if it is actually implementing any of these guidelines. And that's something that I keep thinking about in my head when I come across some AI applications. I don't think that guideline is here. So or I think, wow, that's a great way of implementing a guideline. So this is intended for all AI practitioners. How many guidelines are there? It might sound a little overwhelming, but we have about 18 design guidelines, and they're grouped around 4 categories, and they're so well structured that you wouldn't really feel it. How are these guidelines applied? That's a great question, because these guidelines can be applied depending on where you are in your user journey or where you are in the AI journey, which means that if you are starting to build an AI product, or even if you have built and shipped an AI product, you might want to consider taking a look at these guidelines. So these are applicable throughout the AI journey. And are the guidelines app specific? Actually, no. So that, as I said, is one of the best things about these guidelines. These guidelines are not app specific. Each and every guideline that we're going to go across can be implemented in its own way. So depending on the application that you are building, you can choose to implement the guideline as you deem fit. So here's jumping into the actual meat of the presentation. I will share the link to the live demo at the end of my session, or I'll probably even put it in my references section, but I just stay away from doing that right now because you're going to start playing away with it right away. So here's the guidelines for human AI interaction. As I said, this is live out there from Microsoft, and we can play around with it if need be. But let me just run you through the way they have structured this. This is really cool. So all the 18 guidelines that we're talking about is structured in the form of flashcards. It's so intuitive and so easily interpretable that we can really understand this so well. So you have 4 categories, 4 decks of cards: blue, red, yellow, and green. If you remember, we said that depending on where we are in our AI journey, you can choose to employ any of this. For example, you're just starting with your AI system. So initially, it's the deck of cards or the deck of guidelines that you might want to consider there. If you are looking for guidelines specifically to help you with the interaction, this are the deck of cards. Now, if you are really focused on helping your AI system navigate when it's gone wrong elsewhere or to course correct, these guidelines on the yellow deck will help you. And last but not least, if you have a mature AI system that's, over time, you want to see how it's behaving and how it's interacting with the humans, the green deck of cards are over time would actually help you. So let's take a look at this one by one. Now, the way each of these cards are designed is you have the actual verbiage of the guideline itself, and you have a couple of examples, really good examples that are out there to show you how to actually implement these guidelines. So it's just basic inspiration out of the box. So let's take a look at the first one. Make clear what the system can do. It might sound very, very simple. I mean, even traditional systems go out with documentation, but who reads documentation, right? So an AI system needs to very clearly explain what the system is doing, what the system is capable of doing. And there are some really good examples for that. And this is not just from Microsoft. You see examples from Google, examples from Apple. One of the very common examples that probably you would be able to relate to, PowerPoint. You know, all of us use PowerPoint regularly. But for someone who is really new to PowerPoint, the quick starter is a great example of an AI system doing a self-introduction. So we don't want to assume that the user is going to have a very easy time. We're going to really help the user get up to speed. And we do this in different ways. Like when we build virtual assistants in our team, one of the things that we do deliberately is, as part of the welcome card, the first message that's going to greet the user, we make it a point to not just introduce the bot's name, etc. Also add a set of 4 or 5 pre-canned commands and a pre-canned set of questions that the user can jumpstart with. It sort of just makes that user journey a lot more easier. So make clear what the system can do. Related to that, but not exactly, is make clear how well the system can do what it can do. And this is just fabulous. If you have used Excel, you would probably have come across a pane called ideas. Right? So it gives you certain ways in which you can actually augment your current Excel workings. Now, I'd like to invite your attention to just that word, ideas. I mean, they could have named it suggestions or recommendations or guidance or whatever, but they chose to name it ideas because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a bunch of ideas. Also, if you note, there is a word called preview right next to ideas. So it gives the user an exact set of expectations as to how reliable this feature is. So if you know that this is in preview, you probably know not to rely on it as much as some feature that is in public mode. So that is a great example of an AI system setting expectations upfront and telling the user how well the system can do what it can do. Moving on to the next deck of cards, time services based on context. So this is also a great example. One of the greatest frustrations with users using AI systems is when the AI system is not aware of the context of the user, right? So a great example of that is, for example, you could use maps or the AI maps to actually give you directions. It would send you notifications when you have asked for one. If it is a journey that you need to take, it might also accompany the same notification with directions to the location. How cool is that, right? So that's an example, and you find lots of other examples in that same card. The fourth one, show contextually relevant information. When we type out a Word document, a post or an essay in Word, we would see that most of these Microsoft apps, PowerPoint, Office, Excel, these are all infused with AI. It might look like just another desktop application, but Microsoft has infused this application with AI, and you will see a lot of machine learning powered features inside this. And one such example is in Microsoft Word. You see the acronyms. You see acronyms that help you, with your essays. Like you go to an e-commerce site, so this is quite natural to us. They will recommend products based on your items in the cart or based on your browsing history. How I really miss seeing this and noting this when I search for a movie in Google. Not only would it actually tell me, about the movie, it would probably even deep dive into the show timings for that movie in the nearest theater. And it's been a long time since I saw that, but how I really love that. So being able to just show contextually relevant information. Match relevant social norms. This is a very powerful one, especially when you consider AI systems in a social context or in a cultural context. And for example, let's take one from Google this time. So in Google Photos, because they categorize and they classify photos into various buckets, one of the things that they do is just the verbiage, just the tone of that message. In most cultures, pets are a very important part of the family. So the verbiage used there is your photos of important cats and dogs are organized here. They could have very well said your photos of cats and dogs are organized here. But the sensitivity to that tone is what takes all that time. So that's a great example. And mitigating social biases. This is probably one of my favorites, because this is well, if you ask me, it's the most difficult guideline to put into practice, because as humans, we have a lot of unconscious biases ourselves. And beyond that, to be able to build AI systems that can mitigate social biases requires a different level of IQ and EQ. But great examples available, again, from Microsoft, if you are using analytics or some of the other features. If you can see this on screen, this is a gender neutral icon that they've used. And there are lots of places where Microsoft has used gender neutral icons. It's a great example of mitigating social biases. If you go to Bing and you search for the word doctor, it does not assume that you are looking for a male doctor or a female doctor. It actually shows you both images. And another great example is if you just type, using the Google keyboard or Android keyboard, do you want to meet Edge? It could mean him or her, but if you note the auto suggestions that are showing up there, both are actually shown. So that is a great example of mitigating social biases. Cool. Let's move on to the third deck of cards, support efficient invocation. So this is usually well done in most applications. Whenever you need an AI system's help, you should be able to invoke that efficiently. So supporting the efficient invocation of AI systems. For example, one of the things I use a lot in my PowerPoint presentation is design ideas. The design ideas is not just there on your face all the time. It is there on the top pane. I can invoke it when I want with the press of a button, and I can dismiss it as well, which comes to the next guideline: support efficient dismissal. So when you don't want an AI system around, you should be able to efficiently dismiss it from the scene. So there are a lot of examples for that. For example, in Instagram, you should be able to hide an ad or remove if you're not liking that kind of ad that is being seen, etc. Let's go to the next one. So support efficient correction. A lot, again, just because the power of these AI systems, they tend to help you a lot, maybe sometimes even get in your way and tend to help you a lot. But that does not mean that you are left without a control in your hand. So one of the things that they suggest is support efficient correction. For example, in Google or in any of the, even in Bing, if you search for a search term, and if, for example, you've gone wrong with a typo, a spelling mistake, they do not typically assume that this was what you searched for. Instead, they would also provide you an option to autocorrect it or to sort of correct that option. So it says, including results for Keanu Reeves, do you want results only for Keanu Reeves? So that is putting the human or the user at the center of the experience. 10th one, scope services when in doubt. So all AI systems, again, need not be 100% accurate, or the system itself knows when it's having troubles, dealing with certain cases. So, for example, when the Maps app, the Bing's Map app, is not able to return a specific route to you, what it does is it gives you a set of options. It provides you multiple routing options when it's not able to recommend it. So it scopes services when in doubt. Make clear why the system did what it did. So sometimes we are at splits. We don't know why a certain recommendation was made to us on an e-commerce site. We can choose why was it recommended. If you are seeing a particular ad, certain sites provide you the option of asking, why am I seeing this ad? Why am I seeing this product recommendation? Why am I being selected? Or why is this qualified to pop up on my screen? So that's a great example of showing, making clear why the system took the decision to do so. And go to the last deck of cards, which is the guidelines that you would use for your AI system over time. Remember recent interactions. I think most of us have a problem with the reverse of the fact that the AI systems remember too many of our interactions, right? But yes, a lot of AI systems do this really well. They remember recent interactions. They remember the context under which you were searching, and remembers your recent interactions and transactions well. Learn from user behavior. Again, that is also fair for all, especially e-commerce site. You go to Amazon.com, it definitely learns from your user behavior and it knows what to recommend to you next. Update and adapt cautiously. AI systems, because they're learning and adapting at a very fast pace, it is possible for it to go through frequent updates. Unlike regular software updates, it is possible for it to frequently adapt and update in the site. One of the things that is recommended is update and adapt cautiously. It should not feel like the user of the AI system should not feel like you've changed the gear shift from the first gear to the fifth gear altogether. We got to try to make it as smooth and seamless as possible. Maybe try things like in your help systems and provide options for people to. One that really trumps me a lot, just as a AI user, I've been at my wit's end sometimes especially when social media, you don't know what's really going to happen when you unfollow or you block or you make a decision there. It would be great if the AI system could convey the consequences of the user actions. And to be fair, there are AI systems that do that as well. Provide global controls. Again, most of the controls that are steering these AI systems need to be in a place where users would be able to use it and they would be able to interact and engage and control the AI systems, not hidden in some pane, not hidden away. So notify users about changes. Again, just continuing that conversation. In case you have any changes, let the user know what's new. I'm sure a lot of us from the Microsoft ecosystem is quite familiar with this. Use the what's new button so the user know what's changed from the last time he or she has used that particular application. Cool. So those are some of the guidelines in place. So one of the most common questions I get asked at the end of all of this is, will the guidelines guarantee that no mistakes are made? Actually, no. The guidelines does not guarantee that your AI system will not make a mistake. The guideline helps you plan for failure. If your AI system has made a mistake, it will allow you to navigate that. It will allow your user to be in control and navigate that better and design meaningful experiences. We share a quick example here, a story, in fact. So this is a couple of years back in 2018, 2019. This is a Washington Post that was written by Annette Gillian Brockle, and she addresses this post which starts Dear Tech Companies. So Gillian was a very avid social media user, and she was engaging on social media, and she was happy when she was pregnant. She shared her news, and obviously the social media sites came to know about her situation, and they started popping ads, relevant ads at that point in time. But unfortunately, Gillian's child was stillborn. Though she did announce it on social media with a lot of grief and a lot of pain, and then she did stay away from social media for the time, the previous ads did not stop. They assumed that Gillian would still need it. When Gillian reported and tried to hide those ads and report that this was not relevant to me anymore, which it's in itself done with a lot of grief, they still assumed, imagine this, the AI system assumed that the child has been given birth to, and they started replacing the original ads with ads of baby strollers. So that's when Gillian comes back and says that I never registered for your ads. But then if you have this, if you're really, really smart enough to send me those ads, you need to be smart enough to understand, not just learn the user behavior, unlearn user behavior, put global controls in a place where I am able to find that, unsubscribe from these kinds of ads, parenting ads, and come out of this self. So we always talk about human-centric AI, and this was a brilliant visual that I found the other day from one of the research papers. It's called the second Copernican revolution. We typically think of putting the machines in the center and the humans revolving around that. It's actually putting the humans in the center and using AI machines for their benefit. So how are these guidelines used? We've discussed this earlier as well. They're used throughout the journey of the AI system to, you want to have ideas, you want to have can use this for creativity, for human-centered thinking, to evaluate existing products, anything. Will guidelines slow down the pace of growth? AI is a very happening space, and we're all rushing to get the next big product innovation out there. Guidelines might slow this down a little because you need to stop to apply these thoughts. But in the long run, it's just like security. It's going to turn out to be pretty costly if you don't take into consideration these guidelines. So new techniques and these guidelines will eventually accelerate our progress towards AI products. What beyond guidelines? Now, despite us knowing all of this theory, there can be still a lot of friction and resentment in actually using these guidelines, wherein that's when people start talking about AI laws, AI policies, even at the macro level, how to build diverse teams so that they can better employ these guidelines, so on and so forth. Is this only for AI systems? And this, probably you know this by now. This is not only for AI systems. Some of this, I do agree, can be applied for other non-AI systems as well. But this was specifically created keeping AI systems in mind. And the biggest benefit of these guidelines is just that it helps you plan for failure. It helps you build responsible AI. We always think about AI failures as technical failures, these social technical failures. It is also the failure of humans who have designed these AI systems. We've actually reached that point. So I always tell this, it's just like a kid who's bought a puppy back home. It takes a lot of work, right? This is a complete shift in mindset from a tech first to a people first approach. And that's only when we can actually use these guidelines and can cautiously manage these changes and inconsistencies in AI systems. So here are the references. I would read that out. If you're interested in checking out the demos, that is aidemos.microsoft.com, where you can play around with those cards that we just discussed right now. You can also head over to Microsoft.com and you can see the actual research, award-winning research paper from Microsoft in design.